Definitely a monster heading towards us. There will be intense winds all across this area. It's going to make landfall somewhere in this area. If you can't leave, leave now.
We are under a mandatory evacuation order.
Traffic is 3 lanes deep headed towards Baton Rouge.
This is not a test. This is the real deal.
We're seeing gusts of about 100 miles an hour.
It's just so massive, and it's so awe-inspiring.
We are facing a storm that most of us have feared.
We're in God's hands.
And the news has gone from bad to worse.
The water is going to continue to rise.
A levee breach has occurred along the industrial canal.
I don't want to get caught in the water.
A lot of people inside of the attics, they're screaming. We can hear them, and we're trying to get them out right now.
It looks like a war zone. I've never seen nothing like it in my lifetime.
This is the worst disaster in history.
People all over levees, all over houses, and they're going to die unless we can get help.
It's been a nightmare. This holy, holy hell.
It's hard to believe that we're witnessing this kind of flooding.
We just need help.
The hardest thing is telling our kids what it looks like.
Hey, stop it! Drop it!
We're going to make it. We're going to be all right.
We're going to be fine. We have our faith, thank God.
Category 3 storm and possibly taking aim at southeast Louisiana. Hurricane Katrina continues to move west in the Gulf of Mexico. The big question is, where will the storm make landfall? When will it turn north? John Gum is in the Weather Center. Let's get right to this. John, any new information for us?
Everything that we're looking at indicates this hurricane has the potential to strengthen even more than it already has, and that's something obviously that concerns us a great deal. There's the latest advisory, 24-5 north, 85 west, 497 miles away from New Orleans. Movement is to the west at 7 miles per hour. The wind's at 115 miles per hour, making it a major Category 3 storm. Again, look at this cone of error here. It basically runs from Pensacola out to south central sections of Louisiana. This is the area that it could possibly make landfall in. In fact, we could say we're 100% certain at this point that it's going to make landfall somewhere in this yellow shaded area. Highest probability, based on everything that we're looking at this morning and this afternoon, is calling for Mississippi Gulf Coast to southeast Louisiana. So,
and again, we're not trying to frighten people, but this is one that we are, quite frankly, very frightened of.
We're concerned. I mean, we have a lot of concerns with this storm, Eric, and if it doesn't hit us directly, it's going to come close enough that we're going to see some very nasty conditions.
August 29th, 2005, 5 a.m., New Orleans, Louisiana. The city creaks under the assault of Hurricane Katrina. Winds howl at over 120 miles per hour. Katrina has already swept over Florida and charged through the Gulf of Mexico, even reaching Category 5 strength offshore. In this pre-dawn hour, storm surges flooding the low-lying wards north of Lake Pontchartrain. Sirens wail in the distance as water begins to lap at the levees. In the 9th Ward, Marie DuPont grips the doorframe of her shotgun shack. "I hear the water," she whispered. Outside, the levee along the industrial canal groans under pressure. By dawn, New Orleans will be unrecognizable. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers later tallies over 50 breaches in the levee system, letting lake and canal waters pour through the city. Katrina's fury will drown roughly 80% of New Orleans, causing what experts call the greatest disaster in U.S. history. Today, we retrace that devastation from the hurricane's genesis to the lessons learned 2 decades later. Hurricane Katrina began as a tropical depression in the Bahamas on August 23rd, 2005. Over the next 2 days, it grew rapidly. By August 25th, it was a hurricane, battering the Florida coast as a Category 1 storm. That night, Katrina emerged in the Gulf of Mexico and exploded in strength. By August 28th, it was classified as a Category 5, with sustained winds at over 170 miles an hour. And forecasters warned of coastal storm surge flooding of 15 to 20 feet. By early morning, August 29th, Katrina had weakened slightly, but still struck the Gulf Coast with the power of a Category 3 hurricane. Landfall occurred near the Louisiana-Mississippi border around 8:40 a.m. Central Daylight Time. Even slightly below its peak, Katrina's storm surge was record-breaking. A NOAA storm simulation done before Katrina had predicted 15 to 20 feet of surge and the flooding of New Orleans if the levees failed, a scenario soon to come true. Aftermath of landfall was swift and grim. Over 1,000 people in Louisiana died, many trapped by water. And neighboring Mississippi communities along the Biloxi Gulf corridor were pulverized by winds and up to 30 feet of surge. The storm's damage would exceed $100 billion, making Katrina the costliest and one of the deadliest hurricanes in U.S. history. To understand the flooding, we must understand New Orleans' fragile defenses. Much of the city lies below sea level, some neighborhoods up to 7 feet below, protected only by man-made levees and pumps. Engineers had built nearly 350 miles of levees and flood walls around the city after Hurricane Betsy in 1965. But these were only designed for a 100-year storm, roughly Category 3 surge. When Katrina's surge arrived, it overwhelmed that system. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers later admitted the levee failures were a catastrophic failure caused by faulty design and outdated data. Stormwaters overtopped and eroded earthen embankments, walls known as eye walls, which are tall and narrow, collapsed when water pressure caused foundation sand boils. In the flood's first hours, breaches opened at the Industrial Canal, the 17th Street Canal, the London Avenue Canal, and others. Water poured in by the billions of gallons. By mid-morning, whole neighborhoods were underwater. In Lakeview and Mid-City, residents clung to rooftops. In the central business district in the French Quarter, streets became canals. As Susan Bartholomew, a Ninth Ward survivor, later recalled, all you could see is blood. You know, everywhere. Everyone had been shot and in pain. Describing not only police violence, but the chaotic terror as people tried to find the escape from the rising water. In short order, 80% of New Orleans was inundated. Only higher ground along the Mississippi riverfront, like the Garden District, remained dry. The flooding exposed deep failures in planning and response across all levels of government. Pause. Days before Katrina hit, Louisiana could have prepared more aggressively. The city's emergency plan called for busing the infirm to safety, but in practice, most buses never ran. On August 28th at about 9:30 a.m., Mayor Ray Nagin issued a mandatory evacuation, only 20 hours before landfall. State and federal officials had urged evacuation days earlier, But that final move came too late for tens of thousands without transport. When we talk about local failures, instead of using the buses to clear the city, many stranded residents were told to shelter at the Superdome or Convention Center. As ABC News later reported, these refuge centers quickly became lawless and bereft of food or sanitation. Governor Kathleen Blanco did request federal aid on August 27th, but she did not explicitly ask for the feds to evacuate people, assuming city buses would do the job. At the national level, FEMA, the lead disaster agency, was slammed for being late and disorganized. Within a week, senators and the public demanded accountability. Former FEMA officials blasted the response. Jane Bullock, FEMA chief of staff under President Clinton, said bluntly, "Who's in charge? Is it Mike Brown, which is the FEMA director? Is it Chertoff, which is the DHS secretary? You don't really know." By September 2005, headlines screamed that FEMA was underwater itself. President George W. Bush, flying over the devastation, defended the response but faced fierce criticism. The adage, "Brownie, you're doing a heck of a job," during a high-level altitude TV briefing became infamous in the media. The quote itself was controversial. Even FEMA's own communications were poor. An early memo from Brown to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Chertoff calmly called Katrina this near catastrophic event, but lacked urgency. In Congress, the smell of scandal hung heavy. House hearings labeled the effort a failure of initiative. A bipartisan committee report found federal agencies had varying degrees of unfamiliarity with their roles under the National Response Plan. Locally, Jefferson Parish President Aaron Broussard castigated the bureaucracy. This is bureaucracy at its worst. This bureaucracy has committed murder in the New Orleans area, he said, warning many could have been saved if help had come sooner. In short, nearly every tier of government was found wanting, both in uncoordinated planning before the storm and the sluggish relief afterwards. Amid the flood came lawlessness, with roads impassable and law enforcement overwhelmed. Rumors of looting, shooting, and even roving militias spread. In reality, some looting did occur. Survivors broke into stores for food and water. But far more startling were the reports of police misconduct. In one notorious incident on September 4th, the Danziger Bridge shootings. A police radio call brought dozens of officers to a dry stretch of highway. Instead of finding gunmen, they shot 6 unarmed civilians, killing 2. Survivors later described blood everywhere, bodies writhing in pain. The police had claimed to be under fire, but evidence showed no shootout occurred. Investigations years later revealed a grim cover-up. 5 NOPD officers were convicted of civil rights and obstruction charges for the Danziger Bridge shootings. Though in 2017, a federal appeals court ordered new trials due to prosecutorial misconduct. This violence was an extreme outlier, but it highlighted the desperation of those days. Many officers in New Orleans later said they had received verbal orders to shoot looters and take back the city. The National Guard eventually called in, patrolled the streets with orders to control looting, reportedly with live ammo on hand. Overall, Katrina's wake saw over 7,000 arrests in New Orleans for crimes ranging from looting to violent assaults, far more than in a typical week. And while we're on the topic of those 7,000 arrests, let's talk about who wasn't held accountable. Not a single government official was charged for failures that led to hundreds of preventable deaths. No FEMA execs faced trial, No local leaders were booked for abandoning their people, but hungry, traumatized survivors? Yeah, they got handcuffed for grabbing diapers, water, and bread from stores that were already flooded to hell. Families trying to feed the ones lucky enough to survive were labeled looters, while people who let them drown went on to write memoirs and land speaking gigs. If that's not state-sanctioned gaslighting, I don't know what the hell is. In the surrounding Gulf Coast states, the storm's fury also provoked panic. In coastal towns, Bay St. Louis, Waveland, Gulfport, even entire neighborhoods vanished, and residents awoke surrounded by water and wreckage. Some communities experienced breakdown in order. For days, neighbors armed themselves to guard shrimping boats or hastily salvage belongings from their ruined homes. By the time order was restored, the human toll in Mississippi reached nearly 240 dead, including entire families wiped out in mobile home parks. Yet, amid the chaos, countless acts of heroism glimmered. Civilians and first responders saved tens of thousands of lives. The U.S. Coast Guard conducted one of its largest ever search and rescue operations. At its peak, 40% of the Coast Guard's entire air fleet worked along the Gulf, and over 33,500 people were rescued by Coast Guard crews. Pilots and rescue swimmers hovered above flooded rooftops, hoisting families into helicopters. One Coast Guard rescuer recalled lowering onto a sloping roof to find an elderly couple clinging to rafters. By the day's end, dozens had been saved from that house alone. On the water, the Cajun Navy sprang into being. Louisiana and Mississippi boat owners, from professional fishermen to weekend pleasure boaters, answered cell phone pleas and radio calls for help. State Senator Nick Gattro broadcast a desperate call for rescuers. By dawn, hundreds of boats, John boats, airboats, and even kayaks set on a 2-hour convoy into New Orleans. Volunteer crews boated through thigh-deep and waist-deep water, plucking families, pets, and hospital patients from rooftops and parking lots. And all this ragtag flotilla is credited with rescuing over 10,000 people during Katrina. Other heroics came in every form. Emergency responders who could reach the city stayed to work, often without sleeping or proper supplies. Engineers and utility crews ventured out to make phone and power lines work again. At the height of the crisis, 20-year-old Jabbar Gibson climbed behind the wheel of an evacuee bus. A resident of the Fisher Housing Project who had not evacuated, Gibson drove hundreds of miles to Houston, delivering more than 70 people to safety. Paramedics and nurses in makeshift rooftop clinics held survivors together with vodka injections when pain meds ran out. And we can't talk about real heroes without mentioning Chef Jose Andres and the extraordinary work of the World Central Kitchen. Long before he became a household name for feeding millions after global disasters, Andres and his team were on the ground in the wake of Hurricane Katrina, helping provide hot, nutritious meals to those left with nothing. While bureaucrats shuffled papers and officials gave press conferences, Jose was in the trenches, serving humanity, one plate at a time. He didn't just feed bodies, he restored dignity. That's what real leadership looks like. Not a photo op, a fork, a pan, and a purpose. In the weeks and months after Katrina, the U.S. took stock. Grim lessons spurred major changes. Most visibly, the Army Corps of Engineers undertook a massive rebuild of New Orleans flood defenses. Dubbed the Hurricane and Storm Damage Risk Reduction System, or HSDRRS, the new levees, flood walls, and pump stations were completed by 2011. Today, the system is engineered to withstand a 100-year storm surge, a dramatic upgrade from its 2005 state, though still below Katrina's peak surge. In May 2018, the Corps finished its last major HSDRRS project, the permanent closure structures on the outfall canals. Local authorities, the Southeast Louisiana Flood Protection Authorities, now maintain 192 miles of levees and 244 floodgates. In short, hundreds of millions of cubic yards of earth and levee were raised and armored with concrete after Katrina. On the organizational side, Congress overhauled FEMA. The 2006 Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act made FEMA a more independent agency within DHS, defined its mission clearly, and elevated the FEMA administrator to principal advisor to the president on disaster response. Communication and command procedures were beefed up. New National Incident Management System, or NIMS, protocols and regular drills are now mandatory for state and local governments. The notorious communications breakdown of 2005, when 97% of the phone systems went out, led to major investments in resilient networks for 911, police, and emergency operations. Across the Gulf Coast, emergency plans were rewritten. For example, New Orleans now maintains designated evacuation routes and hardening of shelters. Military support doctrines changed too. Just weeks after Katrina, Congress amended the Insurrection Act to allow domestic deployment of troops for natural disasters, so that future governors need not wait for federal waiver to use the National Guard in flood relief. These reforms have paid off in some real tests. In 2017, Irma struck Florida, but Florida's improved planning and evacuation pillars stressed by Katrina led to far fewer deaths. In 2018, Hurricane Michael made a historic landfall in the Florida Panhandle, but better building codes and quicker relief cut civilian casualties. And when Hurricane Ida roared past New Orleans on August 29, 2021, exactly 16 years later, the upgraded levees held, though Ida still caused flooding. In New Orleans itself, mandatory evacuations for storms are now taken seriously. After Ida, more than 370,000 people fled South Louisiana before the worst hit. Get your butts out of New Orleans was what FEMA Director Brown had warned in 2005. Now officials see that as law, not as folly. The Army Corps of Engineers rebuilt levees, flood walls, gates, and pumps to a new standard, protecting against a 100-year storm. The $14.5 billion hurricane and storm damage risk reduction system was completed by 2018. FEMA reorganized. Congress passed PKEMRA in 2006, establishing FEMA as a distinct DHS agency and giving it new authority and accountability. FEMA's leadership and staff were retooled with career emergency managers. States implemented advanced warning systems and communication networks. The Federal National Response Plan was replaced by an updated National Response Framework. Incident Command, or ICS, is now drilled annually nationwide. The infamous Hurricane Pam simulation in 2004 had warned of every major failure, and now many of its recommendations, mass evacuation planning, surge capacity, have been adopted. Federal grants fund coastal wetlands restoration to blunt storm surge and buyouts of repeatedly flooded homes. New building codes require stronger structures. Local nonprofit networks and volunteer corps like Team Rubicon, born from Katrina veterans, stand ready to mobilize quickly after disaster. Two decades on, could New Orleans survive another Katrina? The answer is cautiously hopeful but realistic. The rebuilt levees and pumps mean that another Katrina-strength storm would inflict far less neighborhood flooding than 2005. Engineers say today's defenses can stop roughly a Category 3 to 4 surge, but they also warn Katrina was at the extreme tail of probability, about a 1 in 500 year event for New Orleans at that time. As sea levels rise and climate change potentially makes stronger hurricanes more common, experts agree no city is invulnerable. What now matters most is evacuation and equity. Officials have learned that the single biggest life-saving factor is moving people out of harm's way early. New Orleans emergency plans now aim to get everyone, including the poor, elderly, and disabled, out of the city long before landfall, using buses, trains, and even school districts as staging areas. The tragic images of nursing homes left behind in 2005 have driven new rules. No large hospital or nursing home may shelter in place if a major storm nears. On August 29th, 2025, we remember those who perished and celebrate those who survived and helped others survive. Katrina taught harsh lessons about nature and bureaucracy, that even the strongest city can be humbled by a single storm. But it also taught the power of human resolve. Community churches became kitchens. New Orleans jazz musicians played benefit concerts, and from every corner of the country, strangers donated blankets, food, even their own homes. Today, listening to hurricane trackers or watching future storm surge models, we hear echoes of Katrina. We hope never to relive those nightmares. With levees fortified, emergency agencies on alert, and citizens more prepared, New Orleans stands a better chance. But the city knows it must stay vigilant, because it's not if, but when another big one comes ashore. Survival will depend on heeding the hard-earned wisdom of Katrina's legacy.